I used to think respected people were simply born different. I thought they had louder personalities, sharper words, stronger charisma, or some kind of natural dominance the rest of us did not have. Whenever they entered a room, people listened. Conversations slowed down around them. Their opinions carried weight even when they spoke calmly. Meanwhile, I felt invisible half the time. I over-explained myself constantly. I laughed too quickly when I felt nervous. I rushed to fill awkward silences because silence made me uncomfortable. If someone looked uninterested while I was talking, I immediately felt pressure to become more entertaining, more impressive, more likable. And strangely, the harder I tried to be respected, the less people seemed to respect me. That contradiction confused me for years. Then one day, I noticed something interesting. The people who carried the deepest respect rarely looked like they were trying to earn it at all. They were not fighting for attention. They were not performing confidence every second. They were not constantly trying to prove they mattered. Yet people naturally listened when they spoke. At first, I thought it was status or appearance. But the more closely I observed them, the more I realized something else was happening underneath everything. They were emotionally grounded. There was a calmness about them that made other people feel calm too. Their energy did not reach outward, desperately asking for approval. It stayed centered inside themselves. And somehow, that made people trust them more. That realization changed the way I understood respect completely. Real respect is rarely forced. Most of the time, the harder someone tries to appear important, the more insecurity people unconsciously feel underneath them. Because human beings are extremely sensitive to emotional energy. We can feel when someone is trying too hard to be liked. We can feel when someone desperately needs validation. We can feel when someone is performing confidence instead of actually feeling secure. And the opposite is true too. We can feel calmness. We can feel grounded energy. We can feel when someone is comfortable being themselves without constantly asking permission from the room. That is where respect quietly begins. One of the first things I noticed about insecure people was how often they physically apologized for existing without realizing it. I recognized it because I used to do it constantly. Lowering my voice when speaking to certain people, making my posture smaller in crowded rooms, looking down too often, pulling my shoulders inward, avoiding taking up space. Even the way I walked carried hesitation, like part of me was afraid of being noticed too much. And people respond to that energy immediately. Before anyone hears your words, they read your body. A collapsed posture silently communicates uncertainty. Nervous movements communicate discomfort. Constant fidgeting creates the feeling that you are not fully settled inside yourself. But respected people move differently. Not aggressively, not arrogantly, calmly. They stand like they belong wherever they are. Their shoulders stay relaxed. Their movements are slower. Their posture feels grounded instead of defensive. They are not trying to dominate the room. They simply are not shrinking themselves inside it. That difference matters more than most people realize. One afternoon, I tested this idea intentionally. I walked into a coffee shop I visited often and paid attention to how I carried myself. Instead of rushing to the counter, I slowed down. I kept my shoulders relaxed. I stopped avoiding eye contact. I allowed myself to occupy space naturally instead of collapsing inward. And something surprising happened. Nothing dramatic. Nobody applauded. But people responded differently almost immediately. Conversations with strangers felt calmer. The cashier spoke to me differently. Even I felt different inside my own body. Because posture is not only communication to other people, it is communication to yourself. The moment your body stops apologizing for your existence, your mind slowly begins believing you deserve to be there too. And people can feel that shift long before you say a single word. Most insecure people live in a constant state of emotional rushing. Rushing to answer, rushing to explain, rushing to react, rushing to defend themselves before anyone even attacks them. I know because I lived that way for years. If someone challenged me in conversation, I responded instantly because silence felt dangerous. If someone interrupted me, I talked faster, trying to regain control of the conversation. If a social interaction became awkward, I rushed to fix the discomfort immediately. But emotionally grounded people move differently. They pause. And that pause changes everything. I started noticing that the most respected people rarely looked hurried emotionally. Even under pressure, they remained steady. They spoke slower. Their movements looked intentional instead of reactive. They did not seem desperate for attention or terrified of silence. That calmness created authority naturally. Because emotionally reactive energy feels unstable. Calm energy feels powerful. There is something psychologically reassuring about people who remain composed under pressure. Their nervous system communicates safety, stability, control. And human beings naturally trust emotional stability. So I began practicing slowness intentionally, not laziness, presence. I slowed my speech slightly during conversations. I stopped interrupting silence instantly. When someone asked me a question, I allowed myself a second to think before responding. Instead of reacting emotionally immediately, I paused and observed first. At first, it felt unnatural. Part of me worried people would think I looked awkward or unintelligent. But the opposite happened. People listened more carefully when I spoke slower. My words carried more weight because they no longer sounded rushed by anxiety. And slowly, I realized something important. Confidence is not loud speed. Confidence is emotional steadiness. The people who seem most powerful socially are often the people least desperate to control how they are being perceived every second. For a long time, I misunderstood eye contact completely. I thought confident people used eye contact to dominate others. So when I tried becoming more confident, I forced awkward eye contact that felt unnatural and intense. It never worked because real presence cannot be faked mechanically. Eventually, I realized eye contact is not about intimidation. It is about emotional presence. Most people break eye contact quickly because vulnerability feels uncomfortable. Looking directly at someone creates emotional exposure. You cannot fully hide while being genuinely present with another person. So insecure people often escape the moment unconsciously. They look away too quickly. Their attention scatters around the room. Their energy feels divided between the interaction happening now and the fear happening inside their head. But grounded people stay present. Not aggressively, calmly. Their eye contact feels relaxed because they are not fighting the moment emotionally. They are simply there. I practiced this quietly during conversations over several months. Instead of trying to appear dominant, I focused on staying emotionally present. I looked at people naturally while they spoke. I listened fully instead of mentally rehearsing my next sentence. I stopped trying to manage every tiny social impression constantly. And something surprising happened again. People opened up more. Conversations became deeper. Interactions felt less performative and more real. Because presence makes people feel seen. And human beings deeply respect people who make them feel emotionally acknowledged instead of emotionally managed. Most people are so trapped inside their own self-consciousness that they never fully arrive in conversations at all. But when someone truly arrives, you feel it instantly. That feeling is rare. And rare emotional experiences naturally create respect. One of the biggest social mistakes people make is believing respect comes from sounding impressive. So they talk constantly. They explain every opinion. They tell longer stories than necessary. They interrupt without noticing. They listen only long enough to prepare their own response. I used to think confidence meant always having something intelligent to say. But respected people often do something much more powerful. They listen carefully. Real listening is surprisingly rare because most people are emotionally preoccupied with themselves during conversations. While someone else is speaking, they are already thinking about what to say next, how they are being perceived, how to sound smart, how to redirect attention back toward themselves. But emotionally secure people listen differently. They stay fully present. They ask thoughtful questions. They allow pauses naturally. They make the other person feel important without needing to compete for attention constantly. And that changes how people experience them emotionally. I remember speaking with an older man at a bookstore once. He barely spoke during most of the conversation, but somehow I left feeling deeply respected by him. Later, I realized why. He listened without trying to perform superiority. His attention felt calm and undivided. And because of that, every sentence he eventually said carried enormous weight. That experience stayed with me because it revealed something important. People rarely respect the loudest person in the room for very long, but they remember the person who made them feel genuinely heard. Listening creates emotional safety, and emotional safety creates trust. That kind of trust cannot be forced. It can only be felt. Most people are terrified of silence. The second a conversation becomes quiet, they rush to fill the space. They joke nervously, over-explain, speak too quickly, anything to escape the discomfort. But silence reveals emotional security faster than words do. Emotionally grounded people do not panic during quiet moments. They do not need constant noise to feel in control socially. They can pause before speaking without feeling weak. They can observe without needing immediate validation from the room. And strangely, that calm silence creates gravity. I noticed this during meetings at work years ago. The people constantly competing for attention rarely felt powerful for long. But there was one man who spoke very little. He listened carefully, observed everything, paused before responding. And every time he finally spoke, the entire room listened. Not because he demanded authority, because his silence gave weight to his words. That changed the way I understood communication completely. Talking more does not automatically create respect. Often it does the opposite. When words become constant, they lose emotional weight. But when someone speaks carefully and intentionally, people instinctively pay closer attention. Silence also communicates emotional confidence. It says, I do not need to rush for approval. I do not need to dominate this room. I am comfortable enough to stay grounded even in uncertainty. That energy feels powerful because emotionally desperate people cannot maintain it for very long. And human beings always feel the difference between calmness and desperation, even if they cannot explain it logically. Eventually, I realized all these habits pointed toward the same deeper truth. Respect is emotional. People are not only reacting to your words or appearance, they are reacting to how you feel about yourself underneath everything. You can fake confidence temporarily. You can memorize body language tricks. You can force louder behavior. But eventually, people feel the insecurity hiding beneath performance. Because emotionally needy energy always leaks out somewhere. The constant over-explaining. The nervous laughter. The approval seeking. The inability to tolerate silence. The desperate need to be liked by everyone. People feel those things subconsciously. But they also feel emotional stability subconsciously too. That is why calmness feels powerful. Calm people are not constantly negotiating their worth with the room around them. Their energy does not beg for validation every second. They are internally grounded enough that other people naturally begin trusting them more. And this changes social interactions completely. You stop chasing respect. You stop trying to control everyone's perception constantly. You stop shaping your personality around approval. Instead, you become more present, more emotionally stable, more comfortable occupying your own space honestly. And strangely, that is usually the moment respect starts arriving naturally. Because people trust grounded energy. They trust people who are emotionally steady enough not to force anything. The biggest misunderstanding about respect is believing it comes from dominance. Most people imagine respected individuals as loud, intimidating, highly controlling personalities who command every room they enter. But real respect usually feels much quieter than that. It feels grounded. The most respected people often make others feel calm instead of small. Their confidence feels natural instead of performative. Their presence feels emotionally safe instead of emotionally demanding. And that kind of respect cannot be forced. It grows slowly through small emotional shifts, carrying yourself calmly, slowing down emotionally, staying present, listening deeply, becoming comfortable with silence, respecting yourself without needing constant proof from others. Over time, those habits change the way people experience you, not because you manipulated them, because your energy changed. You no longer walk into rooms silently apologizing for your existence. You no longer rush desperately for approval. You no longer perform confidence while secretly fearing rejection underneath. Instead, you become grounded. And grounded people naturally create trust. That is the real art of earning respect without forcing it. not controlling the room, not dominating people, not becoming louder than everyone else. Simply becoming emotionally secure enough that your calm presence speaks before your words ever need to.